here's Brody Brazil.
You know, when you actually stop and think about all the different sports teams and leagues and seasons over the decades, there actually has not been a bunch of teams moving around via relocation. I mean, when you look at this graphic, yeah, it's intimidating and it would make you think that nobody's stable and nobody's safe. But this is such a small fraction and a small handful of all the teams that have ever changed their cities, usually because of money, usually because of a stadium issue. And when it happens, it's devastating for a lot of different reasons. A lot of times teams do get replaced in the cities that they departed. Sometimes they don't, and that's part of the process. But again, it doesn't happen very often, despite what this image might depict. I want to go over the 5 worst sports relocations from my viewpoint and get into some of the reasons why. Now, these are not the top 5. These are actually just the honorable mentions. We'll begin with the Cleveland Browns. Their owner, Art Modell, decided, you know what, I'm taking them to Baltimore because, well, Cleveland just didn't have, the spirit or the life to come up with money for a new stadium. Well, then the next day they voted that they would fix up Municipal Stadium. And he said, nope, too late, already gone. So the Cleveland Browns just kind of escaped to Baltimore. The Brooklyn Dodgers. Now, again, this was a little bit different. The Dodgers and the Giants both left New York, went out to California. They kind of had to go out together to make California viable for Major League Baseball and the logistics and travel standpoint. But the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn forever changed that community, and Brooklyn is still bitter about the departure of the Dodgers. And as much as they're now kind of a focal point of baseball and looked at so glamorously, let's never forget that the Los Angeles Dodgers once pieced out of Brooklyn and made a lot of people and a lot of generations following very upset. The Montreal Expos turned out to go to our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and become the Nationals in what would be, I think, the 3rd iteration of Major League Baseball in Washington, D.C. It's almost like they left Montreal to more secure Washington, D.C. as a market. It was more about getting to D.C., I feel like, than actually leaving Montreal. And the stadium issue and the public funding issue, I mean, this is such a common thread. And Olympic Stadium wasn't enough, and they can't find a new spot, and the government of Canada and the province of Quebec, they just weren't helpful enough. It's always going to come down to finger pointing in the end. But the Expos should definitely still be in Montreal. Major League Baseball should have 2 teams north of the border. In my opinion, there's no question about that. And the same thing with the NBA. I mean, if you've ever been to Vancouver and you've ever seen the growth and the potential and the community and how big it's become, the NBA, in my opinion, has drastically missed out on not being in Vancouver in the last 15 to 20 years. I mean, or in Seattle. Let's also get to that. I mean, the Sonics, are going to be featured in this video, but the NBA should have also been in Vancouver over all these years, and it's no disrespect to Memphis and what the Grizzlies have done there. But I think that in the long term, Canada and North America and the NBA would have all benefited a lot more if the Vancouver Grizzlies were still a thing instead of Memphis. And then the Oakland Raiders. Yeah, I'm going to call them the Oakland Raiders because they were Oakland first, then Los Angeles, then Oakland, then Las Vegas. It's almost like what's next? They are so nomadic. They don't stay. They don't have any respect. They treat themselves as if they're like a regional or global thing. They haven't won anything in forever, by the way. But the way that the Oakland Raiders did it over all the years, I mean, we're talking about a team that just cannot stay put. So I'm going to give one or all of their moves honorable mention, which actually now brings me to the 5 I want to get into. It's not the Rams coming back to Los Angeles. It's when the Rams left Los Angeles to go to St. Louis. They'd been in Southern California for 40 years, and they were leaving the biggest media market, well, one of the biggest in the country, for the 23rd biggest, St. Louis, across all the U.S. metros. St. Louis is not the biggest. Now, they previously had an NFL team. They had the St. Louis Cardinals, which moved to Arizona. Yes, that was confusing to have your baseball and football team both have the same name. But St. Louis had hosted the NFL before. No question that they're big enough. But why would you take a team out of Los Angeles, Anaheim to be precise, and move them to a much smaller metropolitan market? Well, it's because the Rams were promised $260 million for a stadium, which back then was a lot of money. It was the TWA Dome. And they were also promised a $15 million chunk of change to build a team facility. Both of those things happened. They used the stadium until they realized, this dome is not getting upgraded and retrofitted as we thought. It's not fit for NFL football. So 2016, after going all the way out to the Midwest, the Rams move all the way back out to California. What? Why? Like, plain pointless behavior, in my opinion. To leave a place that you could be successful, like LA should always have had multiple NFL teams. And for a while, Southern California, I should say LA, had none. And San Diego had one, but LA had none. It's amazing that the league let them move. And then out of all the places, they came right back. So the Rams going to St. Louis in retrospect just never seemed right. How about the Chargers moving from San Diego to Los Angeles? And this is all about one thing for me. San Diego could still very much support an NFL team. You don't believe me? Look at the Padres attendance. Just look at anything that happens in San Diego. There's always a crowd. There's the right atmosphere, the right ambiance. San Diego is a very chill, laid-back type of place. They love their sports. They love their teams. There's no doubt, no question in my mind that the Chargers done right, and the Chargers with a new venue, or the Chargers like in a stadium spot near Petco, or just even rebuilding Jack Murphy Stadium, Qualcomm, whatever you want to call it, rebuilding something there may have done the trick. But the Chargers got caught up in the Rams and the Raiders, and all of a sudden, minus teams in Los Angeles, now the Chargers are interested. Wait a second, we have a little bit of our audience. They said 25% of LA were Charger fans. Yeah, I don't think so. But they wanted to try and capitalize on some of that. They knew the Raiders were maybe leaving Oakland for Los Angeles. They knew the Rams were trying to get back out west. So the Chargers we got to figure out a way to get to Los Angeles. All of this while the league was still trying to keep them in San Diego. In fact, it went all the way to a vote in November of 2016. They had Measure C in San Diego, which was voted down 57% to 43%. But Measure C was to give a bunch of public money. I want to say more than $1 billion to the Chargers to help build a new stadium close to downtown, which, again, we know would have worked, but that was giving them $1 billion almost 10 years ago. And so it's not a huge surprise that that got voted down. Turns out, as soon as the vote went the other way, the Chargers said, we're out of here. They moved temporarily into that stadium in Carson, and then ultimately they share SoFi Stadium with the Rams. So those two temporary years, kind of embarrassing. Even the move to Los Angeles, I mean, if you ask Los Angelinos, am I saying that right? If you ask them, what are the two teams that you would want? Well, they probably wanted the Raiders back, and I guess they would take the Rams back. I mean, the Rams had some history down there. Bill Plaschke of the LA Times literally wrote this in the paper. We don't want you, in referring to the Chargers. Like the Chargers, three's a crowd, and they made it a crowd. The Chargers aren't even the team that Los Angeles wanted. So again, why did San Diego lose a team? Yeah, to give LA a second team, but it's not even the team that LA wanted. What a disaster. The Seattle Supersonics going to Oklahoma City. Now, this is also kind of a tandem two-part story here, because what you also need to understand is that the New Orleans Hornets, not the Pelicans, the Hornets, who came from Charlotte, long story, they had some success in OKC as a temporary spot where they played for 2 seasons following Hurricane Katrina that forced the Hornets out of New Orleans. So Oklahoma City all of a sudden had kind of proven itself. That became an emerging option, an opportunity. And so when Seattle passed this Initiative 91 on the ballot, it eliminated basically public money from ever being spent on sporting arenas anymore. And that was kind of the writing on the wall for the Sonics that they were going to sell this team. They had a hard time getting money to retrofit Key Arena, which turns out has since been retrofitted. It's Climate Pledge Arena, where the Seattle Kraken play, where they have concerts all the time. It's right downtown at Seattle Center. It is a perfect location. Not to mention, Seattle's always been big enough for a Major League Baseball team and an NFL team, and they eventually got hockey. They're just missing the team that they once had that they never should have lost. Owner Howard Schultz, a former owner who sold the team, he said this, about 10 years later, in 2019, he flat out admitted the mistake of selling intentionally to a group in Oklahoma City instead of selling to a group because of his frustrations, couldn't get the money for the arena, couldn't get it fixed up. decided to sell out of town and regretted it. Quote, "Selling the Sonics as I did is one of the biggest regrets of my professional life. I should have been willing to lose money until a local buyer emerged." And you know what? Rest in peace, David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA. Pretty sure he realized that mistake. Howard Schultz, the owner who sold it, realized that mistake. And I think because of all this, this is why in the next handful of months, I'm going to say early 2025, this is why I think Seattle is bound to get an expansion NBA team back. Seattle and Las Vegas, in my book, are the next two NBA cities. The Minnesota North Stars becoming the Dallas Stars. Wait a second. Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes and the state of hockey? You couldn't keep a hockey team in Minnesota? A professional hockey team and an NHL team, the NHL team in Minnesota, and you couldn't keep them? The hotbed of hockey? Now, this is a team that played at the Met Center, a building that was not the Target Center by any means. It was run down. It wasn't great. But the reason that the North Stars, and again, all of this comes down to money and arena stuff, and in this case, business stuff, they didn't play at Target Center due to the Pepsi and Coca-Cola dispute, largely reported. Because Pepsi was served at the Met Center. Pepsi had an agreement with the North Stars to advertise and serve Pepsi at games. But Coca-Cola was exclusively poured and advertised at the Target Center. So the North Stars literally had a better place that they could move into and play their games and get, more facilities and amenities and luxury suites and make more money, but they couldn't because of one sponsor that they were tied into. That's crazy. And the North Stars were pretty good until the end. They made the playoffs for a bunch of years. They didn't make the postseason their final year in Minnesota, 93, but they went to the Stanley Cup final in 1991 and then played their final game in Minnesota as the North Stars in 1993. Ultimately, the NHL took care of them. The Minnesota Wild began play in the year 2000. But again, how did a hockey team ever move away from Minnesota? I'm not going to disrespect Dallas, but Minnesota never deserved to lose a team. And I think the same is safe to say about Oakland and the A's. And this one has a question mark on it because, well, the move hasn't exactly happened yet. We know that the A's have left Oakland for Sacramento, and then after a certain amount of years, it's Sacramento apparently for Las Vegas. But this is a franchise that in 2017 came out to say that they were rooted in Oakland. This was upon the emerging departure of the Raiders. They were already going to Las Vegas. The A's doubled down on the sentiments and the emotions of sports fans in the East Bay. When you make a slogan like that, it's not just for marketing. That's a promise with your fan base. And then 2020 happens, 21, we get into 22, there's parallel paths, but everything is going forward with Howard Terminal, their baby, their project on the estuary, right on the bay, in Oakland, right near downtown. They had so many things going in their favor. The environmental impact report, approvals from committees that deal with the shoreline. Everything was there minus the A's intention and maybe the financing for it. And in 2023, April of 23, they announced that they're pivoting entirely. They have nothing else to do with Oakland. They're shifting all their focus onto Las Vegas, which is crazy. Again, if you think about it, to go from one of the major markets of the country, top 10 at least, probably 8, the Bay Area, to go to the 40th market overall in Las Vegas, and to say that you'll be relying on about 30% tourists to come to your games, and to be putting your stadium on a 9-acre parcel of land right on the Las Vegas Strip, which I know that's where people are and that's where people visit in Las Vegas. The ingress-egress is going to be interesting. 81 times a year, getting 33,000 people in and out of the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard. I mean, this really is the equivalent of, let's say, the New York Yankees. If they wanted to build a new stadium, another one to replace Yankee Stadium, would you do it in Times Square? Does that seem logical or logistical or sensible or optimal? I mean, that's essentially what the A's are trying to do in putting their Major League Baseball stadium on the Strip. And I know there's a hockey arena there, but that's a much smaller size. They don't use it nearly as much as a baseball team would. They're going to try and get 2.4 million fans at that stadium on the Strip every single summer, that closed dome stadium with artificial turf. Which also brings me to the whole pit stop issue in Sacramento. I mean, this isn't just an A to B move. This is an A to B to see move. And the B has some question marks. The facilities of a minor league stadium. Is it 3 years? Is it 4 years? The time in between, how is this all going to go? There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of people that think that Sacramento might be able to hang on to the A's and actually lure them in and not let them leave for Las Vegas if anything in Southern Nevada actually goes awry. So, of all the relocations and for all the different reasons, and I didn't get into too much detail of each one, but usually it comes down to unstable ownership groups and money situations and trying to get a new building and trying to double down on the team's value or make more money. It always comes down to that. And then the fans get involved and fans get fingers pointed at them and attendance gets questioned and payroll. I mean, it just gets so messy so fast. But in my opinion, there's rarely ever a great relocation. But there's some bad ones here, and those are the 5 worst that I just spelled out for you. You made it here to the end of this video. I really appreciate that. Thumbs up down below greatly helps me in this video and this channel. And also before it ends, do me one more favor. Go down there and make sure you are subscribed to this channel. That way I can definitely see you back here next time.